Right.
Okay.
So, may I welcome all to this 10th webinar, which we organize in the current session. The subject is obviously focused on Southeast Europe. This is the second webinar we do on a regional basis. The first one, which was I think on May 14th, had to do with the gas market in the East Mediterranean. Now, this is focused more on electricity on Southeast Europe. Originally, we were going to cover gas, but unfortunately, Milan Zdragovic from Serbia, from Serbgas, who was to participate, he had to face an emergency today because of the severe climatic situation. So he apologizes. So we are going to focus entirely on electricity. So our subject will be the electricity situation in Southeast Europe post the coronavirus, the impact that this had on our electricity demand, supply, and of course our thoughts on how the situation is going to develop, what the opportunities are going to be, how we are going to align national policies with European ones, especially the new Green Deal. It's a very important issue. And of course, the provision of the electricity market in terms of fuel supply like coal, lignite, nuclear, gas. This is also very important. So with us, we are having today Slavtcho Neykov, who was for many years, hello Slavtcho, years heading energy community in Vienna. In fact, he set up the energy community. Yeah, and he put all the whole organization in place. And since then, he's heading the Energy Management Institute in Sofia, with whom we have very good cooperation. Mr. Marko Bislimoski, who is chairing the Energy Regulatory Commission in North Macedonia, is shortly going to join us, we hope. And Alexandros Perellis, who is a senior researcher at IENE, and he specializes also on electricity, and he follows the market very closely. Mm-hmm. So I think between us, we have some good idea of how electricity markets in Southeast Europe are heading in the current period. And without further ado, I will go to you, Slavtcho, and I will ask the first question, which is the preventive measures. What sort of impact the preventive measures had on the electricity as you saw them in your native Bulgaria, but also in the region? How did this affect price, the energy mix, cross-border trade? We are working very closely with major electricity industries in Bulgaria, and I'm sure you have discussed this with them. So please give us a first reaction on this from your side.
Just to brief those who might not know that the Energy Management Institute is a non-governmental organization. It has research functions, but practically it unites the biggest foreign investors in the energy field in Bulgaria.
So let us welcome Marko Bislimoski from North Macedonia. Hello, Marko.
Здраво, как сме?
I have some technical problem, but now it's okay.
Okay.
Здрасти. Здраво.
Здравствуй. Как си, Slavtcho?
Бомба. Ще те кана да дойдеш в България, ама после ще говорим. So, just to recall that the institute which I represent is a non-governmental organization, but it unites the business, the foreign business in the electricity sphere in Bulgaria. These are the three electricity distribution companies, which are ČEZ, Energopro, and EVN. That is two Czech mother companies and one Austrian, plus two companies which have thermal power plants, which are American based. These are AES and Contour Global. That is, what I mean is that aside the research part, the analytical part which the Institute has, we have a very good look at the practicalities concerning the electricity developments in the country from the point of view of the biggest investors. And I want to tell you that in general in Bulgaria, the COVID situation, thanks God, did not cause any supply or production disturbances. We didn't have problems either with the supply or with the production. But what was put forward in relation to COVID was the necessity of the reassessment of the national energy policy priorities in the context of course, of the European, of the EU energy policy context. And I've prepared a very short slide presentation on this, if you allow, Costis. It's only 3 slides, which I would like to put online.
Yeah, please go ahead. I mean, we have discussed this.
Right. Do you see them?
Now, yes.
Now, okay. So my first message, which I want to pass in the context of the COVID, and of course, I cannot jump over the Green Deal, is that there is a turning up of the pyramid in the sense that, you know that in the EU, the energy policy belongs to the so-called shared competences, which means that the EU has a leading role and the EU member states are allowed to intervene only to the extent the EU has not done it or has mandated them to do so. Now, from nowadays perspective, this legal frame will not be changed, but in practical terms, the roles of the national governments, of the national authorities, including also the regulators, will be much, much stronger. That is, the national energy policy priorities will influence more the EU policy formulation. And we are already observing, monitoring, for example, from point of view of the electricity production, very strong resistance by some EU member states, including by Bulgaria, by the way, concerning particularly the coal issue, the coal problem, which is linked to the Green Deal. So the question from national perspective is not whether we shall follow the EU priorities, but whether our politicians have clear mind what the real situation is, and whether to this extent they are ready to defend the national interests at EU level. And I will give you an example with Bulgaria, mostly related to electricity, but also partially to gas. Before we had this COVID issue, we were talking about the national plans on energy and climate, about the role of the nuclear power plant, Belene, how important our coal is. Even at the end of January this year, our parliament adopted a decision with which it obliged the government to do anything which is necessary, please pay attention, regardless of the position of the European Commission, as to save a state-owned thermal power plant. I think that this decision was legally wrong, but anyhow it exists. After COVID and during the COVID situation, the major concerns turned to be the security of supply and of course the social dimensions, which are linked to the fact that too many people lost jobs and so on. And of course we are monitoring now the Green Deal, although we still have a COVID problem because it does not want to leave Bulgaria. The COVID virus is kind of coming back. We have an increase of the cases. There was a decrease, but now it's increased again. I think it's the same in North Macedonia. And of course, we are monitoring the Green Deal, but still there are quite a lot of open issues. And besides, you know that by the end of this year, the Commission plans to present an assessment of the COVID influence. And on this ground, when it comes to the energy markets, including, of course, the electricity markets, on the ground of what I said about the role of the national governments, we shall face a situation where more and more it will be difficult to reach a European level agreement, and the role of the bilateral negotiations between the Commission and the relevant country will become more and more important. We had a European Council yesterday, and I want to tell you that 8 countries, 8 EU member states, have opposed the Green Deal to a certain extent. And these are all coal-dependent countries. Poland is kind of the leader, but it's also Bulgaria, it's also Lithuania, and some others. What is important, however, in this process is that we do not talk only about EU, but we talk about Europe. That is, we take due note of our neighbors who are not EU member states, but with whom we have long-term energy relations. And besides, the energy community presents a good reason for that. And I will make a summary in 3 points. First point is that no doubt there's nothing wrong for me in the energy nationalism, but it will boost, because now it will become evident that in the EU we share same goals, but we face individual problems. We have our own problems, and there will be a lot of fight how to defend the national interests. Besides, it will be linked to the money, and the money is a lot, which is envisaged. At the same time, the business, the role of the business will become more and more crucial. And you mentioned the interconnections. This is certainly a very important side. Another important side is that in the COVID situation, it was the business which suffered a lot. For example, in Bulgaria, the government took a decision that the payments towards the electricity supply companies are delayed, and this was legally justified. So there was a misinfluence on the financial flows, and now the business wants to recover, and it needs to recover because it's the backbone of the economy. And the third issue, the third message which I want to pass, is that all of us, including organizations like ours, that is the NGOs, the researchers, etc., will have to be very active. We, for example, the Energy Management Institute, we presented to the government and to the Bulgarian members of the European Parliament our official comments on the draft regulation on the Just Transition Fund, etc. I mentioned to you that, for example, this issue of this Journal of Energy Diplomacy articles was also shipped today to the European Parliament members. So we have to be very proactive. You know, Costis, that we are organizing on 15th and 16th of October an international conference which is called Energy Policy Review After COVID.
Okay.
So we have to take these steps forward. This is what I wanted to share with you.
Okay.
Answering your question, I'm ready to go into more details afterwards.
Yeah. Slavtcho, I think that was great. I mean, the presentation threw a lot of light and was very, of course, taken back with the nationalistic aspect, but also the fact that all this, there's a group of 8 countries who are resisting the Green Deal. And of course, this is understandable because the economy over the last few years has been built around coal and lignite, and we know this very well also in Greece. So now let me go to Marko, Bislimoski, who is wearing two hats. I understand, Marko, you're the regulator in North Macedonia, but you're also heading the Energy Community Regulatory Board, which is the community part. So I think you're well equipped to comment on what's happening in the region, not only North Macedonia, but also in the region, okay? So you heard what Slavko had to say. I'm sure you have to add on this, your own experiences. So what's happening over the last 2-3 months?
Okay, so first of all, thank you for the invitation. I am Marko Bislimoski, the President of the Energy Regulatory Authority of North Macedonia. And from last December, I became the President of the Energy Community Regulatory Board in the frame of the Energy Community. So, first of all, I want to inform you about the situation in North Macedonia, and after that, we can continue with other discussions which Mr. Neykov open and other issues. Regarding the consumption, consumption more or less in this period was the approximately same as in 2019, because we have increased consumption of households, because the citizens were at home, but we decreased the consumption in the commercial sector, because we closed the restaurants, we closed the malls, but at the end of the day, the consumption of consumers connected to distribution network was the same, more or less the same.
What about industry? Did you have a major slump in industry, or most of industry carried on working?
The industry continue with the usual work, especially the consumers metal industry connected to transmission network. We don't have the problem with this type of industry. We have the problem with the commercial sector, and we have problem with some factories which products are related to European Union. Also, the need of electricity and natural gas was lower than in the previous years. Our expectation is that in the next period, also we'll have the problem with this type of consumers which produce the products which are for the countries from the European Union, taking in consideration the situation in European Union. We have the problem with the liquidity in electricity sector, because the understanding of the people after the first wave of the COVID crisis in our country, they understand that they can go out of the homes and stop to cover the costs, especially for electricity. And in the first month, in March, the revenues of our universal supplier was lower for approximately between 30 and 40% than the previous years, in that period of the year. Also, the revenues from the allocation of interconnection capacities of our electricity transmission system operator are much lower this year than the previous years. For example, this year our prediction is that the revenues from the interconnection capacities to be approximately 12 million euros, and the last year it was the revenues from the interconnection capacities were 23 million euros. on our border with Greece, we are part of the coordination auction office in Podgorica, but for the Serbia, we have the joint auctions with the Serbian TSO, and also at Bulgaria, we have the joint auctions from the TSO. From the yearly auctions, and our revenues are almost the same as in 2019, but that auctions were realized in the end of November and beginning of December last year. But our revenues from the monthly auctions, weekly auctions, and daily auctions are much lower this year. And also our biggest generator, state-owned company, ESM, the revenues from the sales of electricity to free market in that part of the year were zero. For example, in the same period last year, the revenues from the surpluses of electricity, which ESM sell on the free electricity market, were 8 million years, and on the yearly level, the revenues were 22 million euros. So we have some problems with the liquidity, but starting from middle of April and beginning of May, the citizens start to cover their cost for electricity. Still, the situation is not same as it was the last year, but the liquidity is much better from the side from the suppliers. Regarding the natural gas, we don't have a very well developed natural gas network. We have the transmission natural gas network and few small distribution networks, but the consumption approximately is the same as it was the last year. The biggest consumer of our of natural gas are one CHP in Skopje and 3 facilities which produce heat during the winter period, and their consumption of natural gas is lower, but that is because of the weather condition. In this winter, the temperatures in Skopje was higher than in the previous year, and because of that, and their consumption was more or less is lower than 2019.
Okay, so if I could make a comment at this stage, is we heard the story from Bulgaria, from North Macedonia, but also in Greece, we had the same problem, especially in the first 30 days, that is from middle March to middle April. Yes, there was a problem with liquidity in the market because people were not paying. But after that, the situation was very much improved because liquidity in terms of government guarantees were given to the electricity companies. So the electricity companies from middle April onwards did not have any problem paying the dues to the daily market. But obviously there was an initial slump. But I understand in North Macedonia, the problem more severe because of the capacity allocations, which you referred to, because capacity allocations, they are bringing some kind of steady revenue, which suddenly disappears, right?
Yes.
So in Bulgaria, I think it was more like Greece. We had the liquidity problem in terms of consumers not being able or postponing the payments, and then the situation improving. Now, Alexandros, you have been following this in terms of how the prices vary on a weekly basis. Sometimes they converge, and some other times they diverge. And all this, of course, is related to demand, but also to climatic factors. And we have seen the demand slowing in the first weeks after the coronavirus, and then gradually improving. So how are we today in terms of demand? Has demand scaled up to what is expected at this time of the year, or do we still have some time to go before we see demand restored at its level which we expect during these summer months?
I would say that, first of all, good afternoon for me. I would, first of all, have to say that demand right now is below the seasonal expected levels. But this is part to the fact that weather conditions in Greece we have slightly a milder early summer than previous year. But the transition period was quite weird because demand slumped during the last months in Greece. And of course, also in the rest of the region. I have prepared some slides to show you about the demand in the region because I'm closely following the, excuse me. Okay. All right. Demand, we see demand receding. First of all, the first evidences of affected demand by the COVID-19 was on late March. And then we had a period that demand really followed steadily. And the worst case was in April. This data here is presented to you is until late April. So I haven't noted the later data from May when we saw demand recovering steadily. But in general, we see that demand receded by more than 10% in most countries of the region. Indicatively, the highest demand slide in April was recorded in Turkey, and there the lockdown was seriously extended, and extended by late May as well. We also saw in early June situations that in Turkey we had for nationwide lockdown in some religious holiday that they had that really slumped the demand significantly, and also timely mitigation measures in various countries that also affected the demand in some level. Now, in regards to the prices were, of course, are examining on a wholesale level. And here we have plotted the prices from the spot markets of the region. And then we see that the same period in 2019, we have prices divergent in the region, like Greek prices were in the range between 60 and 80 euros per megawatt hour, but in 2020, in the same period, we see pricing slipping between 20 and 35 euros per megawatt hour, and also the spot price in the region are converging together, and this is more evident than any time in the past 2 years that we're monitoring the market in such way. So also the cross-border electricity flows between countries were increased, and that also is a fact because Greece and several other countries experienced late March and April when renewable energy sources were really peaking in terms of output. So that also helped in prices converging, and also the electricity space was not really very contained because of the low demand. So flows between countries and were mostly dependent on the overcapacity of thermal power stations, and also the timely output of renewable energy sources that helped these prices converge in the 2 months of May and April.
So,
And
Alexandros, if I can interrupt, I could say that the overall impression is that prices are depressed as we go along. Okay, we saw this a very clear demonstration of this. Here there's a further graph which shows exactly the same, I think. Very good cataloging of the various geographical areas and countries. I would now like, unless you have something else to add, you have something very important to add, Alexandros?
I have also only one comment, is that a trend, annual trend is that prices on April are driven by demand and rebound, and this is clearly shown in this present graph. But in this year, as COVID-19 took effect, the prices slipped further down, and this can be seen in the graph in the monthly average prices in the spot markets.
Right. So
sorry,
yeah.
Costis, just one
Slavtcho.
question.
Yes.
Just one question to Mr. Perellis. What would be your wrap up about the price issue within this period, and to what extent you think that these changes in the prices are due mostly to COVID, or is there anything else which has influenced the prices?
I would say that also in late March and early April, we had seen some. Actually, in Greece, we saw a snapshot of what was going to be in the future. For example, we saw demand low, but also we saw the absence of lignite production overall. That is evident and is patent of what is going to be in the electricity mix in the future. And because, of course, in Greece, the spot market resembles the whole market and not just part of the market, because all electricity passes through the day-ahead market to the spot market. This shows that probably the electricity mix based on renewables is possible, and that will affect the market positively in the terms of prices receding. But of course, I have to say that the overcapacity of Bulgaria, for example, and the overcapacity of Serbia and other countries that have overcapacity of coal really acted as a reserve to the whole region, in a sense that besides the late May, when we saw Kozloduy being off for 7 weeks for maintenance, we saw that it acted like in a way that served the market by significant amount of exports that balanced the variable renewables in a way that was efficient for the market to formulate these prices. But also demand played the role, because that we saw that the effect that unnecessary capacity of coal could be actually be used as backup generation, I would say, almost like that, like backup generation to balance the renewables.
Okay, we'll come back to this point. And now I'd like to move to the next item, which is how the crisis impacted investment plans in electricity infrastructure, possibly gas, and on market development, because we see that markets are in continuous transformation. We have a very big retail movement here in Greece. We see that there is a lot of new players in the retail market. They managed to participate and develop this market only because the incumbent, which is Public Power Corporation, has given space for them to expand. And I'm sure this is the situation in other countries, more or less. So investments, both in infrastructure and markets, are very important in electricity. And I would like to start with you, Slavtcho, if you could tell us what is the situation in Bulgaria. We're following the plans for Kozloduy revival. We're following the greater use of gas. I'm sure there are other things happening.
Right. Well, thank you. Let me just start with one principal comment following what also Mr. Perellis said, just to tell what my opinion is. The COVID situation did not make kind of huge disturbance of the market, excluding this partial liquidity issue. When it comes to security of supply, there was no problem. But what COVID brought extra was sharpening the existing problems and putting them into another light. This is my understanding. And from point of view of investments, particularly in the electricity and in the gas sector, which you touched upon, COVID put forward in Bulgaria the necessity to reconsider what we have currently on paper in this integrated national energy and climate plan. On one side. Second, it showed sharply the necessity of changing the approach, in the sense that the politicians and the regulator need to stop thinking so much about the prices, because they go more and more towards to be market oriented. We have now changes in the law, but we have to think about the investment approach, particularly in the context of the upcoming reforms in the frame of the Green Deal. And from this point of view, when it comes to investment in new electricity capacities in Bulgaria, the situation is kind of strange, and I want to be very open with you. I completely disagree with what is written in the official documents of the government, particularly in this integrated plan, because there it states 2,000 megawatts new nuclear capacities. This is Belene, the Belene nuclear power plant, which for me is complete science fiction. It will not happen because of many reasons, which I will be happy to elaborate afterwards if you wish. The other investment which we need to reconsider is related to the upgrade, where possible, of the coal thermal power plants, although we have a huge problem because one of the state-owned, the biggest state-owned thermal power plant, which has a capacity of 1,620 megawatts, is at the edge of bankruptcy at the moment. And the only thing which currently saves it, this is Maritsa East 2, which currently saves it at the moment, is the low level of the emissions, of the emission prices. When it comes to gas, I want to tell you that very unfortunately, but since 2005, the decrease of gas consumption in Bulgaria is at the level of 60%, 60%. We had close to 7 billion cubic meters per annum. Now it's about 3. The increase is very slow, they try to promote kind of household gasification, but it's a very slow process. The good point from point of view of the investments is at international level, the interconnectors, the one with Greece, and also the what we call in Bulgaria Balkan Stream, although some call it Turkish Stream. Regardless, whatever you call it, it's this link from Russia via Turkey to Serbia. And of course the interconnector with Greece, which has I don't know, 20 years, 30 years history already. It's a very old story. Hopefully it will be finalized soon. So to wrap it up, investment-wise, there are realistic things for me, which are particularly linked to the gas sector. There are unrealistic things for me, which are linked to Belene particularly, but I want to open a bracket here that one of the options which is being discussed, because we have 2 nuclear reactors built there in Bulgaria, one of the options which is being discussed is eventually to have at least one of them on the site of the Kozloduy nuclear power plant. Now, some experts say it's possible, others say it's not possible. I'm not an expert on the technicalities, I can't tell you. But Belene will not happen. And from point of view of investments, this is a key, this is a kind of a key issue, because if we don't have a realistic look what will happen with 2,000 megawatts capacity, which is planned for Belene, I think that the whole picture is kind of unstable.
Can I ask you, Slavko, why is this huge drop in gas demand? Where?
Well, a lot of industry collapsed.
Okay.
Chemical industry and others. So it's mostly from the industry part. We have never had substantial household gasification. It's about 3% at the moment.
Okay. And
they tried to kind of promote it, but it's not very successful.
And what about new power plants based on gas plants?
What is one of the options which is one of the options which is being considered is transforming existing thermal power plants which are on coal, making them on gas. But currently these are kind of still not projects, it's ideas, if I may say so. Okay. We are far from having a project on the top. The cogeneration issue is moving quite well, which is good. But in general, the gas consumption, as I told you, has dropped drastically within the last 15 years.
Okay. So now let's go to Marko. Marko, give us an overview of what is the investment outlook in North Macedonia in the electricity sector. Because it appears to me that electricity is really a major industry for North Macedonia, with lots of interconnections all over the place. I mean, in Greece we have 2 interconnections with North Macedonia. With Bulgaria, probably you have another 2, and you have with
Serbia and Kosovo.
with Albania. So you are at the center of things.
Yeah. We have the interconnection with all our neighboring countries, except Albania. 2 years ago, we started to work on a first interconnection between North Macedonia and Albania. It's Elbasan Bitola, and it will be finished after the 2 or 3 years.
Oh, okay.
But regarding the interconnections, we don't have the problem, and we are interested to finish that interconnections with Albania. But regarding the electricity infrastructure, regarding the networks, more or less we have the very well situation. We don't have the problems. But the biggest generator in our country, we use the electricity is from the thermal power plants. It's approximately, depend of the year, depend of hydrology, between the 55% and 62-63%. We have 3 blocks in Bitola, near to Greek border, and we have, it's 233 megawatts, and we have another thermal power plant in West North Macedonia. It's 120 megawatts, but the reserves of the lignite, they are on a very low level. And in the next period, we will replace that thermal power plant in Kičevo, that's the city, with the photovoltaic with 110 megawatts. But we have the problem with the thermal power plants in Bitola. We have the reserves for the, let's say, for the next 10 years. The quality of lignite now is very low, and we have to find appropriate way to switch from lignite to other sources. One possibility is natural gas. We have already one line with Bulgaria, and also we start to build a new line to Greece, but we will need time, and also we will need time to, there are a lot of investors interested to invest in the CHP, especially in Skopje, because the only one part of Skopje use the district heating, and the other part usually use, most of them usually use electricity, and some of the households use, and also in the wood. So in the winter months, we have problem also with pollution. So we have to find appropriate way to switch from lignite. First of all, we have the reserves of lignite for the next 10 years, and that is that. And also, when we will start the process of negotiation with the European Union, there will be additional costs for our thermal power plant in Bitola. So there are, in the last period, in the last 10 years, we have a new approximately 200 megawatts installed capacity of the renewables.
That is wind and solar, and
wind
biomass.
and solar, biomass, and small hydropower plants.
Okay, right.
Most of them use feed-in tariffs, and the average price of the producers which use feed-in tariffs is approximately 110 megawatts per euros per megawatt, per megawatt hour. But on the other hand, the price under which ESM, the state-owned company, sell electricity on a tender to universal supplier last year was 34.5 euros per megawatt hour. That was decision by the government. He named the prices for electricity to be, they explained to be stable, but from my point of view, the electricity price for households in North Macedonia is still very low. And because of that, we have the problem to attract investors to invest in development of the natural gas distribution network.
Okay, thank you. Now, I think we should move to the last part of the agenda, and this is the situation with regard to the European Green Deal, the European policy towards decarbonizing. And of course, this has a big impact in our countries, in our region, because we all rely, as we've been through, on lignite and coal. Now, the Greek government, being relatively new, last year took a very brave decision, and they said by 2028, we're going to stop using lignite. And as a matter of fact, they stepped this up earlier this, last 2 months, and they said, no, most of the lignite capacity will be taken out of the system by 2023. And what's happening is that we're going to have one unit which is being built, Ptolemais number 5, which will be operational for 5 years once it is completed. Now, this is having a big impact, and is going to have a big impact on the electricity mix. But I think one way that the Greek government, that Greece can afford to do this, is because we have developed a lot of competitively priced electricity imports, both from Bulgaria and North Macedonia, and maybe sometimes from other countries like Romania or Italy or even Albania. So because right now, 20 to 25% every week of our electricity is being imported. They're imports. So it's not just used for balancing purposes, which used to be the case for many years, 5%. Now it is becoming a main pillar of the electricity supply in Greece. So renewables plus higher electricity imports allow us to take decisions saying, look, we're not going to use any more lignite. And gradually, this will be supplemented or will be replaced by large-scale renewables. I know Slavtcho wanted to discuss this very much, so here is the opportunity.
Thank you, Costis. Just to say that there were 2 questions in the Q&A format, one about gas and one about the nuclear power plant. So you decide when you give me the floor to
please go ahead and reply to the question.
The first question was why I think that the nuclear power plant will not be built. There are several reasons. I will mention 3. The first one is that when in 2004 the project was restarted by our Prime Minister at that time, it cost 4 billion euros for 2,000 megawatts, 2 reactors, each of 1,000 megawatts. Now the price is considered to be roughly 10 billion euros for these 2, and I think it is not realistic. I think it will be more. The second reason is the time. Even if all procedures go very smoothly, which I doubt, but even if they all go very smoothly, we might have electricity from the nuclear power plant Belene not earlier than 2033, 2035. That is 15 years from now. And I don't know an economist who will dare forecast what the price of electricity will be at that time as to make the relevant calculations, particularly noting the technological boom. And the third reason because of which it will not happen is that in 2004, 2005, there was 85% support by the population of building the new nuclear power plant. Now it is hardly 30%. And besides, the attitude towards nuclear has changed a lot. You know that it is not supported by the Green Deal. The nuclear is not a priority in the Green Deal context. So from this point of view, economically and time-wise, it will hardly happen. When it comes to the gas question, there's a question about talking about the role of TAP and TANAP in the question box. I just want to mention that Bulgaria has concluded a contract with Azerbaijan, and we have 1 billion cubic meters of gas per annum secured. The question is, can we use this gas? And on the top, because as I told you, there was a substantial drop. Further, the prices of the Russian gas for Bulgaria dropped very, very much. And last but not least, as you know, we are relying also on possibilities for LNG. including with your support. So the question is not whether we shall have gas, the question is what we shall do with the gas. So these are my answers. And when it comes to the Green Deal, just 3 points which I want to mention. From the point of view of the Green Deal, yes, we have a huge issue in Bulgaria when it comes to coal. The problem is that unlike your government, our government seems to be afraid of talking about Bulgaria being dependent on imports of electricity. We try to be more self-sufficient in this context. And from this point of view, in the integrated national plan on energy climate, it is envisaged that we shall use coal at least by 2030, which is complete utopia for me, because economically the coal will be dead by then for me. The second issue is that we still have not moved towards using what the EU law allows. These are the capacity allocation mechanisms, which is a format which is in accordance with the EU law, but we are still in some kind of procedures. And it is for Bulgaria, it will be valid, these capacity mechanisms will be valid only until 2025. Okay. So this is how I see the things when it comes to the Green Deal. Otherwise, the biggest problem, and it is not only for Bulgaria, it is for every EU country which will benefit from these funds. People have to understand, and also the governments, that no funds are secured. It will not be a bag of money. We have to present viable projects which are in line with the Green Deal concept. And we are lagging behind on that. Okay.
I would like to add to that, especially addressing the question on TANAP. Yes, Greece also has an agreement for 1 BCM of gas. In addition to that, we have TAP crossing Greece from one end to the other. But in direct opposition to what's happening in Bulgaria, we see a gas renaissance in Greece, in that over the last 3-4 years, we have seen gas consumption being increased from 3 BCM, which was about 5 years ago. Now we have 5 BCM in 2019, and probably it's going to exceed 10 BCM over the next 5 years as new gas-fired capacity is coming on stream. That's one. We see also an expansion of regional gas grids for household and commercial use, and more industry is gas. So we see that, yes, the availability of gas, including that from TAP and TANAP, is going to make a difference, but even more so is LNG, because the LNG prices, as you all know, have dropped tremendously. So now we have a competition between LNG and gas from pipes. And we saw that about 60% of the gas now being consumed in Greece is coming from LNG. And in addition, we have spare capacity to provide some competitive gas to Bulgaria. And even though the interconnection is not there, we use the original pipeline from Russia through Bulgaria to Greece in a reverse flow, and provide occasionally the Bulgarian market with competitively priced gas. So gas, I think, has a big future, especially as we decarbonize and more gas use will be evident. Now, I'd like to finish with Marko, because Marko, you mentioned the pipeline, gas pipeline, which is being built between Skopje and Thessaloniki. I mean, although some infrastructure is there, but roughly it will be joining the two big urban centers through this gas pipeline. DESFA, I know, is going ahead with the plans, and from your side, it's MERS, I understand, is the company who is building the pipeline. When do you think this is going to be completed?
I believe that from our side, will not have the problem because we will use the oil pipeline between Thessaloniki and
Yes. Okay. Yeah.
so we will not have the problem regarding
The route. The route is given. Yes.
Yes, it's very clear, and I believe that in the next 2 or 3 years we will finish that new pipeline. And what is the very important, really, we need the natural gas. As I explained before, we have to use the natural gas for generation of electricity. And also we will believe that, and a lot of industries will switch from electricity or other oil derivatives to natural gas and to reduce their costs.
Okay, I think we've reached the end of our discussion period. I'd like to thank you all for your participation. I'm sure we have many other things we wanted to discuss, and I think our first contact today through the platform could generate some ideas of what we could do next. And I think what we could organize and maybe think towards early autumn, maybe early September, to organize one webinar, especially on decarbonization, and do some coordination in advance, and try and get as many people on this, and raise some questions which we already discussed briefly, but we could elaborate on them and try and attract a wider participation. So thank you really, thanks a lot for your participation, for your patience, and for having thought of so many very timely issues. The markets are developing, the policies are developing, and we have to respond. And in that sense, I hope that our debate has been useful and constructive, not only for us, but also for the people who have been participating and following this debate. So without anything else, I just want to wish you good afternoon.
Thank you.
And thank you a lot, and we'll meet again soon. Okay.
Thank you for bringing us together.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, Slavtcho. Bye-bye, Marko. Okay.
Bye.
Bye.
We'll be in contact. Bye.